Timraha hula vanavushak Taifshi agus ulaveist. That's how is every witch, ghost, and monster. Over the weeks coming up to Samhain or Halloween, we will be telling the stories of witches, vampires, monsters, and all things that creep around this time of year when the veil between this world, and the other world is lifted. So sit back and enjoy the great Celtic music as always, learn some Gaelic, but prepare to be scared.
Hide away. Do you wanna run away? We could just run away. I wanna taste you, girl. I want for nothing more than just a piece of you and what you got. I feel something that I cannot forget. I feel something deep within. Let's feel no regret. My only love, the one who sets me free. You are my God above, the queen of the sea. I'd die 100 times just to be with you. Commit 1,000 crimes to hold you in my view. I feel something that I cannot forget. I feel something deep within. Just feel no regret. I feel something that I cannot forget. I feel something deep within. Just feel no regret. If we could get it on, come again. I feel something that I cannot forget. I feel something deep within. Just feel no regret. I feel something that I cannot forget. I feel something deep within. Just feel no regret. Black magic, black magic, baby. Black magic, black magic, baby. Black magic, black, black magic, baby. Black magic, black, black magic, baby. 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 Black magic, black, black magic, 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 baby. 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 Baby.
Scottish Gaelic is native to the Gaels of Scotland. Scottish Gaelic developed out of the Old Irish, and learning this beautiful language can be a direct link to your Gaelic ancestors. Follow along in Feuchamaich Beagan Gaelic, and like I said, let's try a little Gaelic. Here is a few Gaelic words to help you with your Halloween or Oiche Samhain, which, Bana Feuchamaich, wizard, Feuchamaich, ghost, Taifshi, apple, Ul, nut, crow, lantern, Lantar, mask, Udanen, monster, Ulaweist, owl, Kalak Oiche, bat, Yaltak, pumpkin, peapack, and turnip, tunip. All right, enjoy.
As the sun sets in the west and the sky grows dim, through the leaves the last warm rays are shimmering in the breeze. Take my hand and I'll show you the way. Come with me down the woodland lane. Night has fallen in the wood. There's an earthly sigh as the woodland folk come out to dance throughout the night. Take my hand there stands the Golden Queen, and her voice lights up the night and fills the trees with dreams.
Celtic history brings you the tales of the land, castles, warriors, heroes, legends, and customs that have created the rich, vibrant, and sometimes strange and wonderful history of the Celtic world. Americans love Halloween. The candy, the costumes, and the creepy decor. It's just great fun. But as beloved as the holiday is in the States, it didn't originate here. In fact, the history of Halloween dates back thousands of years to the Celtic celebration of Samhain, a festival that marked the end of the harvest and the start of a new year. The day was also said to be a time when the veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest, and when humans could communicate with those beyond the grave. Ooh. Now this year, before you go trick-or-treating or put on your trusty witch costume, take some time to learn more about the dark history of Halloween. It turns out the holiday is much more interesting and eerier than you thought. Halloween has some Celtic origins. Most scholars agree that Halloween, as we know it, started some 2,000 years ago when the Celtic people in Europe celebrated the end of the harvest and the start of the new year in a festival called Samhain. It was also a time of communing with the otherworldly spirits, with big bonfires lit in honor of the dead. In addition to honoring the dead, the Celts also believed that the spiritual presence on Samhain made it easier for Celtic priests to predict the future. They'd build bonfires and burn crops and animals and sacrifices to the Celtic gods. Villagers would attend the bonfire wearing costumes of animal heads and skins. Now, nowadays, many of us associate bats with Halloween, and the same was probably true centuries ago. When the Celts lit bonfires, the bonfires would attract bugs, and the bugs would attract bats. In later years, various folklore emerged citing bats as harbingers of death or doom. For example, Nova Scotian mythology notes that if a bat settles in a house, a man in the family will die. If it flies around, a woman in the family will perish. Now the Romans, they conquered most Celtic territory by 43 AD and brought their own fall festival with them. Their October celebration was called Feralia. It was commemorated by the passing of the dead. As with most territories they conquered, traditions and holidays mixed together and created new ones. Fast forward a few centuries and even more changes arrive. Several Christian popes attempted to replace pagan holidays like Samhain with events of their own design. By 1000 AD, All Souls' Day on November 2nd served as a time for the living to pray for the souls of the dead. All Saints' Day, assigned to November 1st, obviously honored saints, but it was also called All Hallows, and that made October 31st All Hallows Eve. And later, of course, we turned that into Halloween. Now this is where it gets its name. Now despite the new religious focus, people in Old England and Ireland continued to associate the time with the wandering dead. They set out gifts of food to please the spirits, And as time wore on, people would dress in scary costumes in exchange for treats themselves, a practice called mumming, which is similar to today's trick-or-treating. The holiday really started taking off in the middle of the 19th century when a wave of Irish immigrants left their country during the potato famine. They popularized the celebration nationally with their new superstitions and customs, like the jack-o'-lantern, which used to be carved out of turnips, potatoes, and beets. Now, while kids didn't trick-or-treat just yet, they did play plenty of pranks in the tradition of mischief-making. By the end of the 1800s, more communities pushed for a secular or safer set of rituals. People started holding Halloween parties that emphasized games, fall food, and customs over witchcraft and troublemaking. Trick-or-treating skyrocketed in popularity by the 1950s, when Halloween became a true national event. Today, over 179 million Americans celebrate the holiday and spend about $9.1 billion on it per year. Americans love Halloween wholeheartedly, but the day isn't even an official holiday, despite all of the festivals and festivities that happen on that evening. Halloween is still just a regular day for us working stiffs. Pun intended. Now, as stories of Halloween go, the one that probably sticks out the most is the story of poison candy on Halloween. It seems like we're always inundated with, rumors of this and that happening on Halloween with somebody getting poisoned by their candy. And it all stems from a Halloween legend of the Long Island lady who started the poison candy scare. Now, are stories of Halloween poison candy just propaganda from dentists and concerned parents? Or is it real? Well, the New York Post suggests that the 1964 incident of a Long Island woman who handed out arsenic pellets was the incident that launched a million fears. It was October 31st, 1964, when Elise Drucker, her sister Irene, and a school pal set out along Salem Ridge Road in Greenlawn to fill their sacks with goodies. "We were hobos," said Elise, just a teen then, enjoying one of her last Halloweens. When they arrived at Helen Fayle's house, it started as a typical interaction between candy seeker and candy giver. "Aren't you a little old to be trick-or-treating?" Fayle teased. Now, the housewife and the mother, Fayle, had teenage children herself, and she dropped what appeared to be a load of sugary loot into each of the 3 bags. The youngsters had no way of knowing that the arsenic pellets had been mixed in with the candy, wrapped in napkins. Now remember, this was 1964, so homemade candy and gifts were common on the trick-or-treat adventure. It wasn't until the girls returned home that the sinister truth was revealed. Gray said her mom dutifully spread the colorful treats out on the table at their Centerpoint home to investigate. Now, this mother was rare because the act of checking candy wasn't really widely promoted at that time. And it's a good thing she did, because inside the napkin was a bottle cap shaped ant trap with the warning poison. Snopes, the fact checker, has a better description of Fayle's actions though. Annoyed that many of the trick-or-treaters were too old to be asking for free candy, she made up packages of inedible treats to give to the teenagers. The packages contained dog biscuits and steel wool pads and the ant buttons marked as poison and labeled with skull and crossbones. She also took the precaution of telling the teenagers the packages were a joke when she handed them out, and there is no record of anyone actually being harmed by her actions. Still though, Fayle pleaded guilty to endangering children and served us. It just went from 64 to 82, it went nuts. And it reached its height when we had the Tylenol tampering incident that killed 12 people. Now, it had nothing to do with candy, but it's associated with it. And while tampered candy has been found for over years, no children have died. A sociologist who studies Halloween sadism explained to the Post that now that the idea of tampering with candy is out there, a sociopathic person might take that idea and utilize it to hurt people. So just because no one has ever been killed by poison candy doesn't mean the threat is gone. We should be even more watchful and more vigilant as always, so check that candy.
A pirate of great fame. Young Annie Bonny sailed the sea where the best mastered cutlass and pistol, and escaped the hangman's noose. The Endeavour, and yo-ho, the rum it flowed, but His Majesty's navy was ready this time. The crew being punch-drunk, Annie led the stand. She drew cutlass, drew pistol, but stood 20 to 1. Young Annie Bonny sailed the sea where the best mastered cutlass and pistol, and escaped the hangman's noose. Annie went to see Jack, the gallows being his fate. He'd fought like a man, it's not like a dog he'd had. Jack and his crew met the hangman at dawn. Young Annie escaped, and legend has it set sail. Young Annie Bonny sailed the sea where the best mastered cutlass and pistol. Young Annie Bonny sailed the sea where the best. Young Annie Bonny sailed the sea where the best mastered cutlass and pistol, and escaped the hangman's noose.
Everyday Celtic Ways brings you the mythology, traditions, and customs that have created a unique and personal culture that still affects those that are Celtic and those that just love the Celtic world. The Judas legend. You need to understand the scripture, as it will give you the knowledge to understand the legend of Judas. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, said this while explaining his compulsion for his own vampire story. Luke 22. Now the festival of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. And Judas went to the chief priest and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you all as wheat. This is kind of odd, but Satan came to Jesus and wanted to put his disciples to the test. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fall. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers, Jesus said. But he replied, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison, even to death. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. Now while Jesus was speaking, a crowd came up, and a man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus held him back and said, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? You see, Jesus knew. So what is the Judas legend, you ask? He was the father of all vampires. When Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, he was possessed by Satan. He knew what was happening, but because his faith was weak in Jesus, he was not a true follower of Christ. He was cursed by God. Judas had been putting on an act so he could be within the inner circle for personal gain. When the rewards he sought didn't pan out, he sought other means to enrich himself. This is when Satan saw a way to destroy all that Jesus had accomplished. He used Judas to this end. Then after Satan had done his damage, he left Judas to fend for himself. Judas, unpossessed by Satan, felt great remorse, even though he was not a true believer, so he tried to give back the silver to cleanse his conscience, but it was too late. In his shame, Judas went to a yew tree and tried to hang himself to end his miserable life. Now this is where the story gets good. While Jesus was being purged and taken for crucifixion, God came to Judas, this poor, wretched soul that had been in league with Satan to betray Jesus, and all for selfish gain. God had never been so disappointed in one of his creations. Now while Judas threw the rope over the tree, climbed up, put the rope around his neck, and hung himself, God decided to let Judas hang there in immense pain. Then, with the help of the archangel Michael, God exacted his punishment upon Judas. As an example to others in the future who might do the devil's bidding, he cursed Judas. Judas would not be able to die. Death was too good. He would never know the comfort of death. So Judas would be forced to live out until the final day. And then because the light is good and the dark is evil, Judas would never be allowed in the light of day without experiencing intense burning and pain, because he had taken of Jesus' blood and body in the communion and not really meant the words he spoke, and he did this in the presence of the Lord. Judas would forever crave the living blood, but it would never give him the salvation that he so desperately seeks. Because he betrayed Jesus for silver, silver would cause him great pain and suffering. Judas would live out in the shadows until the final days after the tribulation. God's punishment sent shockwaves through the heavenly hordes of angels. Never before, even with Satan's fall, did he exact such a punishment. Judas, he found a cave in a tall mountain somewhere and chose to just hide out until the time of his death, of God's choosing, of course. However, during the 8th century, a Celtic warrior who had gotten lost while fleeing during a battle ended up finding Judas's cave and confronting this strange old man. Judas at this time was almost 800 years old, but he still moved as if he was 30. Standing 50 feet away, Judas could feel the blood pulse through the warrior's veins. And in that instant, he could no longer resist the craving for living blood, and he attacked. The warrior and Judas fought fiercely. The warrior fought as he was trained, and Judas fought like a wild animal. Judas bit chunks of flesh from the warrior's body, so the warrior had no choice but to do the same to Judas. It was this exchange of blood that caused an unexpected byproduct of the curse. The warrior succumbed to his wounds and lay there dead, while Judas sat in a fetal position, reviled by his actions and what he has become. Moments later, the warrior sat up. Strange that he was still alive, and then got up and tried to run away out of the mouth of the cave. But as soon as he entered the light of day, he began to burn. So he retreated to the cave, confused and just bewildered by what had happened. It was at this moment that Judas realized that he could create more like him by feeding on the innocent. Now, the warrior was the first vampire, but Judas was quick to realize that unlike him, his creation could be killed. Judas went through 100 or more people before he understood all his creation's limitations. You see, because Judas tried to hang himself in a tree, wood through his heart could kill one of his creations. Because Judas was forbidden from the light, light could kill one of his creations. Because Judas craved the living blood, his creations would also crave the living blood. And without it, they would die. And last, Judas' creation could be killed with silver, because Judas betrayed Jesus with silver. Now, unbeknownst to Judas, he was given another curse. He could have his creations, but they would be his family. He might even love them, but they could die the death he'd so desperately yearned for. Because they are evil and do evil things, they would die in droves. Judas would feel the sorrow on a level he had never known before, and exacerbate the curse laid upon him. Now, all this is written in the book of Gaidhlig, written in 843 AD by a Catholic monk named Aed, A-E-D. Now, what Aed doesn't tell you is how the young Celtic warrior spread the plague of vampirism across the Celtic world. The Celtic warrior was named Celico, and in the Czech town of Celicovice, which is named for him, there's an 11th century graveyard built upon an earlier graveyard which contained 14 skeletons thought to have been considered vampires. They either had their heads cut off, their hands and legs tied, or silver spikes driven through their bodies. You can go see this graveyard today. You can even see the skeletons in a local museum. Now, in this town, Celico, as his power and influence grew, he began to think of himself as sort of a king. Finally, the town elders got together and made a plan to kill Celico and his brood of evil creations. Then one day, while the vampires had retreated from the dangers of the sun, the town took action. They felt it was their duty to Almighty God to rid the world of vampires. But alas, even though they killed all they could that fateful day, they realized their works were in vain only a few short days later, when a traveler to town came through and told them of a plague that cursed the lands where he had come from. His name was Eric von Helsing, a Bavarian who came to this town to help rid it of vampires. Van Helsing was happy to see average people being able to kill vampires, and it gave him hope. He swore that day that himself and his family would hunt down vampires until the world was rid of them. Think about this. Since the tribulation has not happened, somewhere there's a cave with a little old man just waiting to die.
Garden and thorn, good drought, and well,
Welcome to Dark Celtic History. The legendary Beagan Sea. Now, the legendary Beagan Sea is also known as the White Woman of the Scottish Highlands. They are mystical creatures that take the form of beautiful women, lurk in the Highlands, and wait to seduce young travelers and drink their blood. Now, they're thought to be fairies. The Beagan Sea are generally withdrawn from society. Unlike their succubi counterparts, they didn't care about power, wealth, or youth. They only cared about feeding, luring young hunters in by inviting them to dance with them until they grew too exhausted and to overpower the Beagan Sea. Now, they would then feed upon their hapless victims, draining them of their blood. Unlike vampires, though, the Beagan Sea would use their long, sharp fingernails to slit their victims' necks in order to drink their blood. Settled in the mountains and forests, the Beagan Sea would often lure in hunters, drawn to the men by the smell of the blood from their kills. Now, legend has it that these women had hooves instead of feet, which they kept hidden under their long dresses. And unlike vampire cousins who were fond of shapeshifting into bats, the Beagan Sea favored a wolf form. They were never any known male Beagan Sea, but if a woman is killed by these creatures, she will turn into one. The Beagan Sea had only two known weaknesses. They had a fear of horses, and they were vulnerable to iron, the only known substance which could kill them. The most popular tale of the Beagan Sea tells the story of a young group of hunters who stopped for the night in a small hunting lodge. The men built a fire and began eating and drinking, expressing general merriment after a good day's hunt. As they began to voice how nice it would be to have company of a woman, there's a knock at the door, and four beautiful women stand at the door, having become lost in the wilderness, and ask if they could join the men in their shelter for the night. The men, silently congratulating themselves on their good fortunes, invite the women in. Now, after a while, the women express a wish to dance, and the men waste no time in asking them. The four men coupled off perfectly. Soon the dancing became more vigorous, and before the men knew what was happening, the Beagan Sea had slit their throats of all but one man, who was nearest the door. As soon as he saw this, he bolted. He realized what was happening and ran over to the horses in a frenzy. It was there he realized that the Beagan Sea were not venturing near the horses, so he understood one of their weaknesses right off. But the man stood weary-eyed among the animals all night. Just before dawn, the women headed back towards the wild. The lone man cautiously headed back towards the hunting lodge, hearing no sound from within. When he looked inside, he saw his three dead comrades on the floor, their skin almost translucent as they lay in a pool of blood of their own. Wow. I had been that guy. Love a heritage? Now remember to check out my YouTube channel. It's got Celtic music, podcasts, Gaelic language, Gaelic song, Celtic history videos, plus lots more. And my Facebook group where you can give me your inputs and insights on all things Celtic.
Goodbye, Apple Baby. Marsha Weave.
Goodbye. but I'm going to let you go with a song. It is well known that the Druids were the spiritual leaders of the Celtic world. They guided the Celtic peoples through a world that was violent and cruel. Because of what a Druid could do, they feared to a certain extent. Did you know that the mirrors could cause hallucinations? You might see an illusion or a creepy monster if you stare into a mirror too long, or at least something you cannot explain. The phenomenon is known as Psychomanteum, and it dates back to ancient Greece. But this practice was widely used by the Celtic Druids, who would gaze into a pool of water to communicate with spirits or to see visions of future events. Then they would interpret what they had seen and pass that knowledge on. Now, it would be easy to say that because of what we know now, they must have been wrong a lot. But in fact, the Celtic peoples revered the Druids for usually being right. They guided the Celtic peoples for over a millennia using techniques like this.